Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this Sunday, this Halloween afternoon. I am Lila Mays, and it is my pleasure to be here this afternoon with two authors who have such interesting and similar backgrounds. Today, we're talking about Imani Khalid's book, There Was Violence, as well as Tanisha Monique Miles' Broken Baby Doll. What's so interesting about these two books and these two authors is they are friends of mine and have been for a very long time. We are all right here from Southern California, the lovely land of the angels, Los Angeles. And we all went to junior high school together, which is crazy. I do want to acknowledge before we jump into this conversation about surviving trauma, recovering from trauma,
Yes.
the shame around trauma, all of that, violent trauma especially, right? We want to acknowledge that the month of October, this is the last day of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Shout out to all of you recovering survivors, folks who have created safe spaces. And Imani, we're going to get into that because one of the things that you are doing is with the Mva Foundation, I'm going to ask you to talk about that a little bit, is creating safe space for folks who are recovering from violent trauma. Again, this is Imani Khalid, the author of There Was Violence. So, Imani, let's jump right on into your book,
Okay.
which is really you telling your story, right? A little boy growing up in South LA, in a violent home, neighborhood, all of that, right? But the story is told from the eyes of Von Harper. He is the main character of the book, but really based on true life events that you experienced, right? So I think this is such a fascinating story, what actually got you to write this book. So I want to jump into the day you were buying groceries and what happened that sort of got you started journaling about what was happening with you. So let's go to wherever you were buying groceries and what happened that day.
Right. So thank you for all that. This was all accidental.
Okay.
Like, never envisioned being an author. Like growing up, and even as into my adulthood, I had a working knowledge, like just this vague notion, like, hey, some things happen to you.
Yeah.
You know, there were some issues, and sort of accidentally addressing things coming up. But the day you're talking about it was actually a cool day. I was in Marina Del Rey. Then my ritual was, hey, Sunday I'm going to go to this place called J. Nichols and have breakfast, and I'm going to go do my grocery shopping. And I think on that day, Elizabeth Warren was in this restaurant that I was at. So it's like people were like kind of happy and bubbly.
There
like,
was some energy.
Yeah, there was this electric energy in the place, and I'm like I know the staff in this place, and I got caught up to. I'm like, oh, cool. Elizabeth Warren was here, so I ate. I'm leaving, and as I'm walking to my car in the parking lot, there's this guy, and he looked like he was keyed in on me, and everything that every physical confrontation that I experienced as a young man, his micro expressions were projecting that to me, or so I thought. Or every scenario where I saw physical conflict develop into a fight, I was seeing that in him. And
So you're sizing them up.
yeah, I'm sizing him up, like I'm having all of these micro thoughts, like, okay, watch your distance, keep your footwork up.
Got to keep the footwork up.
Keep your footwork up. Tuck your chin. Like be loose, like watching from the shoulder down, like everything is coming together.
That's wild.
Yeah, and so it's like happening in slow motion. But what I was misinterpreting was his, not anxiety, but he was excited and looking for his lady friend who was behind me.
I read that.
Right.
I read
So
that.
there was an anxious energy, but it wasn't like
It wasn't
you were
directed at
interpreting
me.
this energy like it's this anxious energy. It was some energy. But
Is it appropriate to call it paranoia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very appropriate.
Yeah.
Because you know, with him, it was paranoia. But again, like I made this assumption that this was directed at me. And it's like, I don't know if I took his parking spot or something incidentally. Like I've had people upset with me in the past and I didn't know until after the fight, you know, and other people too. So it's like, you know, and when I was talking to Tavis last week, I was like, well, I've been in enough scuffles to know, like, okay, we're not going to have a TED talk about
We're
this.
just gonna get to it.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna waste time figuring this out. If it gets to it, I want to be prepared to throw these
Right.
hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you never know if somebody
never
is just wanting to
know.
fight or they trying to end you.
Right.
So it's like, I'm just going to be ready. And I'm going to use every trick I got, everything I learned in martial arts, every street trick, really,
Yeah.
and defend myself. But as this guy got closer to me, he passed me and he was trying to flag. He was looking for his woman and they embraced whatever. And I just felt silly. Like I felt really silly. I'm like, you know, one of us could have got really hurt. I could have jacked him up and, you know, what am I going to tell, you know, the law enforcement or the judge? Like, oh, I thought he was going to, you know, do something to me. So it just,
That happens though.
yeah.
That really
absolutely.
happens.
So
So that was a tipping point. Like that was like, okay, stop, think about this. Like what, you know, dive into this. And that was the start.
That was your aha moment, so to speak.
It was that, it was a tipping point. It was a clear sign. And there was probably signs. That was a sign like you really need to dive
there's some
into this.
trauma.
Yeah.
There's
but
some
I didn't know.
reacting to something.
Yeah.
So
That's
I'm gonna
good.
jump in there because I think it's really interesting but I think it's important, Imani, to say that day was the day you went home and started journaling about this stuff. No?
Well, before that, I sat in the parking lot at the grocery store for half an hour. Just replaying it.
Processing it.
Yeah, I was processing, and then even while I'm shopping, I'm thinking about it. And then I got home because I've been in the practice of journaling for years.
Oh,
So
I love that.
That wasn't a
And were you a journaler before? Were
Yes,
you journaling before
I
you
call
read
it
the book?
rescue writing.
rescue. I like
Because
that.
rescue writing, it saved me many times. Like I was silenced for so many years. I didn't know how to voice what I was experiencing and what I was exposed to and how it was affecting me. So I was misperceived most of my childhood years, but I wrote it. It was all in writing.
Wow.
Yeah. And what's shocking about your book is that it was so many details, so much history. It's almost like, how do you, through trauma, remember all that shit?
I have an impeccable memory.
Oh,
That's
that's a
one
gift.
of-
That's a gift.
Yeah, no, it is. It's like I remember what music is playing, the smell of the environment, what I was wearing, the temperature. Like my memory pulls in a lot of detail. Thankfully, otherwise I don't think I could have written.
It was transcribed in your book, though, and that was what captured me the most in your book, and the difference between your writing and my writing. I was descriptive. However, trauma has affected my memory to such a degree that I have flash pictures, but not in such detail.
Well, it's interesting. It's just interesting that you say that because in reading both of your books, yours years ago, I had to go back and do some refreshing, right? But your stories are very descriptive, and I know that you did go back and do interviews with like family members to sort of open up those memories.
Yeah.
But the stories you tell, I think it's really interesting that the title of your book is Broken Baby Doll, and both of your stories are really about how your trauma starts in your childhood.
That's what was striking to me.
Right? I mean, and I have to be honest, some stuff, I've told this to Imani, but I haven't shared this with you, sis. Some stuff came up when in reading both of your stories about living in South Los Angeles as a child. I didn't live in a violent home, but I was exposed to violence at a young age in a home that I often frequented. So it wasn't my home, But
It still could be classified as domestic, though, if
it
you
was
spend a lot of time
listen,
there.
it was
Yeah.
absolutely domestic violence. My sister and I were exposed to real violence, and there's something so descriptive in your book, Tanisha, about like hood life where there's all this trauma anyway, like socioeconomic level, all of that, right? But like butt naked people running down the street because they're getting beat up at no real life.
No, I'm laughing because I'm remembering
Do you
that happened
Yeah.
in my past.
88th place in Figueroa was where my father lived.
Oh, yeah.
I saw it all.
Yeah.
People getting
Classic.
shot next door, all of that. People
The
running
Sherm-
from
he
home.
talked about the Sherm
All of that
experience.
stuff.
I was like, oh, that's like, I felt like I knew him.
Right. So we lived in the jungle, but then my dad lived on 88th place in Figueroa.
yeah.
I had it on both sides.
Yeah.
So I'm
But were you in the jungle when it was, because my parents lived in the jungle when it was predominantly white.
No.
Oh, okay.
I
So
was
you
in the
was there
jungle
when
when I
the
was
hood
in
when it was the hood.
elementary school and junior high.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know
Nicollet
that.
Avenue.
What?
Yes.
I didn't know
Okay,
that.
but we digress.
Yeah.
So, I want to get into this. So, Imani describes when he starts telling his story, he's a young boy. And Imani, you describe your first experience with violence was in the home with your mother and your sisters, right? And then Tanisha, you're a young person, from what I can remember, describing violence with your aunt, I believe it was. But I want you all to talk about, if you can, was there any shame around this violence? Could you put a label on it as violent, or did you label it discipline? How did you, if you labeled it, how did you describe it? And then as an adult, in thinking back on it, do you have shame around that? And maybe not your personal shame, but I'm experiencing the shame, or I experienced this violence in my home with my parent or with my other loved one. You want to go first?
I'll let you go first.
I'm like so ready. So I was raised by my great-grandmother because my mom was fleeing her abusive relationship. And it's important to note that my father, both of his parents died when he was 12. So he was an orphan. He went and started drug use early and got with my mom and was abusive with her. My mom was going through a divorce. So I like to identify the fact that I was born in trauma through a trauma bonding.
Wow.
So I came in the world at a disadvantage.
Meaning the trauma bonding was what?
The trauma bonding was my dad getting his untreated PTSD resulted in abuse towards my mother.
Okay.
My mother hadn't gotten treatment for her divorce, growing up in a house with divorce and physical violence. Nobody was treated, and they met. You know how couples. I mean, you have to know a little bit about trauma bonding, but two people can connect. I will use Imani for an example. We have so many commonalities, and there could be a physical attraction, but we base our love, our connection on the fact that we have so many similar backgrounds. We're attracted to each other, so that must be love. But really, it's trauma bonding. So that's what happened with my parents.
Okay.
And it wasn't as the abuse went along, my mom fled him for the safety of her life and left me with my great-grandmother. Great-grandmother raised me, right?
Yeah.
So being raised by the great-grandmother,
You're shaking your head, Imani. That feel familiar?
No, it's just, I always come back to the disruption of violence. Like, your great-grandmother was in a stage of life where she should be relaxed, but then she's thrust upon.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah, the disruption.
But she was so committed to me having a healthy life. So I could see the challenges there. And like I tell people, I didn't feel loved because I felt like my grandmother felt like it was more of a task to make sure that I was raised right, but not given the affection and the accommodation for being abandoned. So I never felt that. But I said all that to say, my grandmother, being raised by my grandmother, I didn't see a lot of violence or anything because I came from a well-rounded, good home, Christian folk, mother of the church type of setting.
Okay.
But my mother would come and pick me up for weekends. My mother would pop into town. I had her sister was the one who did my hair for school. I went over to the auntie's house all the time. So that's where I was exposed to the violence, the all the bad stuff. And I went back to report to Medea like, ooh, you're not going to believe this.
You know, it's interesting you say that because, as I said, my home wasn't a violent home, but I was exposed to it very young. And then it was the same. We would come home and be like, Mom, A, B, C, D. I used to say it was like living in a light place, church home. Grandmother was a church mother. We did everything in the church. Ushered. Imani teases me because he knows I sang in the choir. All of that. So I would be like, I live in this lighthouse, but then we're exposed to darkness so regularly. But I'm sorry, I just had to say that. So you weren't exposed in your home necessarily.
Not at that time,
Not
but
at
shortly
that time.
after. My mother came and took me from my grandmother. They literally had a fist fight over me.
Wow.
And a knockdown drag out and pulled me out of the home. That's still traumatizing for me because my life changed dramatically after that. But then when I got with my mother, there was the drugs, there was the violence, there was the everything that was so foreign to me. It was a culture shock to me, and that was the root of when things started. I got exposed to domestic violence. Couldn't call it a name, but what I did know is the way grandma raised me. This is and this is bad. This is very bad because I was in a church. So I knew what was defined as sin and what was defined as righteousness. I didn't know to call it righteous, but I know this is good, this is bad.
Healthy and unhealthy.
And the shame behind it was you can't tell nobody this because that will, our thing was, what happens in this house, my mother was one of those, what happened in this house stays in this
Mantra.
house. But Medea's house, wasn't nothing going on to be
To tell.
nervous. Yeah, nothing to tell. So I was kind of like, I got to tell somebody this because this is important. And so I was the kid that talked too much, still am, that talked too much, but I didn't have a voice because whenever I went to talk,
You were silenced.
Yes, silenced. So now you have an adult woman who finally got some healing and breakthroughs. Oh, I stay running my mouth because we're going to talk about all this shit.
Imani, were you silenced as a little boy? Did you feel the same way? I mean, we're going to get back to that other question, but that just struck something in
Was I
me.
silenced?
Did you feel like you didn't have a voice as a young boy?
No. I mean, short answer, no. But that was also accompanied by, hey, maybe it's not a good idea to
make
voice
a whole
yourself.
lot of noise.
Yeah. So it was both.
That sounds a little bit like some underlying shame, though.
Well, there was shame. There was shame in, like, to be, a young boy or a preteen or whatever. There's shame in people knowing that sometimes, like as my neighbor put it, he said, "Oh, your mother's on the warpath again."
Yeah, we use that term too.
And there's the shame of just being broken, like being beat, or like the run of, like, all of that stuff. There was this masculine, like, because we're men, we're prideful, and so if somebody inflicts some kind of harm on you and makes you cry or breaks your spirit, there's shame tied to you not being able to ward that off or to endure it and sort of sustain your masculinity.
You got to sit there for a second,
I
though.
was going to say the same thing. I'm going to look straight at the camera. Brothers, did y'all hear that? I mean, I think you articulated that. That's important, Imani. It's really important because so many men are walking around with that. Boys.
He used
teenagers,
the word broken.
men.
He used the word broken, which means that somewhere in his journey he identified that within himself. But just looking at him, and my first impression was, wow, this is a well-poised, educated, this brother hooked up. You would never be able to just look and guess any of those things, but just imagine how many men carry that without being able to articulate that word. And I say that all the time, that brokenness is not a gender thing.
No, it is not.
There's a lot of broken men who can't even give voice to it.
Well, there's a lot of, like, one of the gaps, I think, and then this is kind of new to me, just talking about it in the forum. But one of the gaps that I see is the lack of language that we should be using. Like, I'm just started using the word trauma in the last couple of years. I just started using, just other needed language to drill in or to drill down on how problematic and disruption is another word that comes to mind.
That's a
Like,
great
That's
word.
amazing.
the threat assessment is a phrase that like I feel like, and I don't know if scholars or educators are using this language, but these are some of the words and phrases that I think people need to use to further drive home the point of how broad and deep this issue is.
How about let's pause for one moment, Lila, because those terms you used, let's review some of those terms because
Okay.
I want to put them on the forefront. Call out some of those things that you just named.
Okay.
If you can remember.
Like with examples?
No,
Or-
if you want to.
Okay, so some of the phrases, threat assessment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Threat assessment is constantly, for me, it was constantly being in a state where the priority was to wake up, engage what's happening around me so I don't get hurt. And that was in the house and that was outside of the house, both of which I say were minefields. They were emotional minefields because you don't know where the mines are necessarily. And sometimes the mines move around.
Right. Ooh.
So the threat assessment, the emotional minefield, the actual trauma of it. Trauma meaning there was an event at some point.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that.
You're welcome. There was an event at some point in one's life where you are forever changed and negatively impacted.
Right. You were
Please,
harmed.
thank you for saying that because I was thinking that somewhere in our discussion that we would have to spell that
Define
out because
trauma.
some people just, because of its negative connotation, they don't identify themselves with having any trauma, but it is a human experience.
Well, if you're a black person, let's just go here
Let's
for
start
a second.
with black, yeah.
If you're a black person in America, you have experienced trauma, period. If you're a black woman in America, you have experienced trauma, period. If you are a black man without question in America, without question, you have experienced some
Yeah.
form of trauma.
Yeah. And as a side note, some people go out and read Dr. Joyce DeGruy, Gruy. She talks about generational trauma, even past with the DNA.
Yes,
Yeah.
we talked
Gruy?
about that.
DEGRUY.
Even
Joyce DeGruy.
passed through the DNA.
Yep.
Our ancestors passed some stuff down to us.
That's-
Our parents
yes.
passed some stuff down to it's just cellular. On
A lot of people
cellular
don't
level.
even identify that. Some of it had nothing to. That's why I brought up the point of my parents' trauma bonding, and then
That was a
I
great
was
point.
birthed from that.
Right.
So I didn't even know when I got here, this happy little innocent kid, that I'm bearing the brunt of my parents' trauma.
Your parents probably didn't know.
Right.
That you were.
Right.
It's like this whole thing, man, is sort of insidious the way COVID is, like the virus. Whether you believe it or not, it's there.
It's happening.
And
I
and,
love
and,
that.
And
I want to scream right now.
scream. but like people are like have a lack of awareness about it.
Speak on it.
They don't have the tools. They don't have a working knowledge of how to. My parents didn't model conflict resolution.
At all.
Right.
And they did, but they pulled that pistol out, and that was
Well,
conflict
yeah.
resolution. That was their conflict resolution.
Yeah. I mean, but then like trauma comes in different forms. But again, guys, and I will challenge guys on this. Guys don't call it as such because they don't want to appear weak. But it's
That's
like
what it is.
it's like, dude, I know where I fall on the tough spectrum.
Yeah.
I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm not UFC guy. I'm not
Yeah.
third world country drug warlord.
Yeah.
Like I'm not that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you are a big and muscular dude, but yet a car driving down the street at night with no lights on scares you, you're traumatized.
Speak on that.
Like, come on, man.
Money.
Speak on that.
Money.
But guys,
Speak on
guys
that.
don't wanna
That's
say it.
deep.
And I say that all the time. Even though they're conditioned to this lifestyle, they really have no idea how much fear they're walking in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Somebody, I had some guys on the podcast once, and one of the guys said that these names they have. Lil Red, he was talking about he was Devil or Ice Cold or whatever his name was. And he said that a lot of them hold on to the name and the image because they know that without that, they ain't shit. And so there's a fear behind coming from behind that identity because I have alliance, I have protection, I can hide behind this vibrato, so to speak. I can get away with, all these, all these things that are, I will say, a low life. I can get away with all of that because it's part for the course.
Well, so I want to say this. I acknowledge you, Imani, for your vulnerability in sharing your story because I think too often, all of this, everything you're saying, threat assessment, the disruption of violence, all of that, having the ability to identify these things in your own life is amazing, and it's a level of vulnerability that is beautiful. And if men could understand that vulnerability is a strength,
Say
more
that.
men would talk. But you all have been conditioned to think otherwise.
Yep. And I get why. I can
Sure.
go there, but go ahead.
But
No,
go
we
ahead,
want you
go
to
ahead.
share.
Well, because like in battle or in warfare, it's not the time and place to be vulnerable. Like you may have to fight or run for your life or whatever. So it's also about perception from your peers. Like nobody really wants to be in the foxhole with somebody who's so-called weak.
Yeah.
Or nobody wants to be in the foxhole or in combat with somebody who they can't rely on. But what's been missing in my observation is when we're not in a state of crisis, that we can circle back.
Adaptability.
And, we can circle back on that and address it and fess up. Like allow each other the chance to say, hey, that when those bullets was whizzing by our head, I was scared.
I was scared.
Or when that dude got cracked in the head with that bottle, that frightened me. So it's just like with men, we're so hyper, I want to say hyper, I don't know what the word is, just self-conscious about our image. Because the reality
Image
is,
conscious.
the reality is that could impact many things. It could impact you being perceived as weaker or weak will impact your chances of a romance. Like a woman is probably not going to value that kind of a guy who's just fragile or perceived to be fragile.
I was gonna
But that's
say.
what you've been conditioned to believe.
Yeah.
Well, I think two things could be true.
At the same time.
Yeah, like there are.
Because you're going with the whole nice guys finish last thing.
No, I'm not going with that because I lead with niceness.
Okay,
like
good, good.
I like being nice.
Yeah.
I like being kind.
Yeah, that's what we like too.
Yeah, but I know. but I know, like I can act like anger and aggression and ferocity is at my fingertips.
Yeah.
Like I've learned how to access that.
Okay.
So people look at me and they go, "Oh, Banana Republic,
Yeah.
Argyle sweater.
Yeah.
Oh, and people use words like, "Oh, you had a Cosby upbringing." I'm like, "Well, which Cosby? Which Cosby thing
Which
are you?"
Cosby you talking about?
Yeah. You talking about the cocktail Cosby or
Dr. Huxtable.
yeah.
Well, to that point, though, I want to say this. So I agree. There are two sides to the coin in terms of a man being, I was going to say ultra vulnerable, but vulnerable, period. I think more women find that attractive than men understand and believe.
Okay.
We do want to feel protected
Yes.
and safe.
Yes.
Vulnerability doesn't diminish your
At all.
being a protector.
I agree.
At all.
I agree.
And actually, my heart feels safer with the
With
man
a
who
man-
demonstrates
Absolutely.
vulnerability versus the dude that's so tough he can't cry.
Right.
He can't, show any emotion. I don't feel safe with.
Yeah,
That's
and-
my
and-
history.
and that's probably a guy who's not dealing with his own stuff.
Come on, sir.
Right.
Come
Right,
on.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we have you here because you know what? Here's the disadvantage. You have someone like me who is in the healing process and I see my progression in it. So I feel like I can voice more based on my life experiences, based on my interpersonal relationships. But I told you this. I said I can't speak for a man because I'm not a man. However, y'all ain't talking. You know what I'm saying?
I can see that.
And so it's like I've been longing to hear the male perspective with regard to the things that we're talking about, because I just need to know, are y'all even thinking about this shit, or is this just us?
I'm an exception. I'm probably an exception. I don't know how I got to be that way.
Is it the sisters?
No.
No.
It's like I've done the autopsy on my past.
Well,
if you will.
so that's hugely important. So I have to stop you right there because if you haven't done the work, then you can't identify, you can't figure
Speak
it
on
out.
that.
It's no self-reflection. So that's hugely important. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's always been a priority for me, is introspection and getting
beautiful.
to the bottom of things and doing what I call being comfortably uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right. And so like when I backtrack and do the detective work on my past, like I was the kid for whatever reason that was interested in different stuff, who wanted to, at different times dive into the causality and how I got here in an emotional space.
That's good.
I've been to therapy, couples therapy, individual therapy, different times. I've been journaling for years. My close group of friends are hyperverbal men.
I love
They're
that.
masculine men. They're men from different races that live on different continents. So everything has been leading up to the book. Like when you kind of reverse engineer how I got here, I have been unknowingly, there was activity priming me to be in a place.
You were writing
today.
the book, you just hadn't transcribed it.
I was figuratively writing the book and building towards that, and it just so happened that through the journaling and the introspection and having some friends who I can exchange thoughts, uncomfortable thoughts with, it positioned me to be in a place today where I can look back on some of the events that happened and just say, and with a decent level of comfort say, hey, here's what happened to me. Here's what was fucked up.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing, though.
Well, yeah.
The
I wish it would-
self-actualization, the self-awareness and self-actualization puts you at an advantage when it comes to coming out of trauma, because that's the biggest part of trauma. The shame of trauma is that shame loves silence, secrecy, and is bound by the fear of judgment. So if you're not able to communicate, or you're not aware, you can't even identify it, number one, and then you can't verbalize it, you're stuck in that. Like Lila used the term stuck in the story. So that's what makes it so difficult for people to even have these tough talks, because you haven't even identified that, because like you said, trauma was never used in my household. Mental health was never talked about in my household. It wasn't until I became a nurse that I said, oh, shit, my mama is bipolar. Oh, my dad has PTSD. Oh, and they never went and got officially diagnosed. But then I understood the drug history and alcohol history because you're self-medicating your mental health issues.
Yeah.
But I started saying, well, damn, maybe I got some of this shit and I need to check it out.
Yeah, well, it's also important to acknowledge the unknowing bad actors or participants in it.
Okay.
And and from a male point of view, the unknowing participants are guys who say, "Get over it," or "Suck it up," or "Push through that."
I want to jump in right there
Okay.
because that's such an interesting point. I was reading something yesterday, and I call that gaslighting, by the way.
Oh, okay.
We are gaslit from baby when we fall and scrape a knee, and our parents are like,
Get
"You're
up.
okay, it's okay."
Ain't nothing wrong with that, boy.
Yeah.
Get him
You
up.
know what I'm saying? And a part of that is to protect us, they think, to say, oh, if I react a certain way, the baby's going to react a different way. If I don't, so I can't acknowledge that they may actually be hurt because that'll amplify.
That was their defense mechanism too.
Absolutely.
Getting through slavery
That'll
and all of that.
amplify this little incident, which could have been traumatic. Even if it's a scraped knee, like, you're okay. But we start learning, well, then I actually am hurting, but you're telling me
We
that I'm okay.
Desensitize.
So can I actually really say when I'm hurting if you're telling me that I'm okay? I mean, so we are
Well,
learning.
it's really a mind fuck.
Yes, say that.
I'm feeling hurt, and you're
Yeah.
telling me
and
I'm
you're
okay.
telling me I'm okay.
Yeah. And you better
Or
not
get
cry.
over it.
You
That
better
too,
not cry.
especially but I know that those were you. I know you heard those messages
Oh.
based on the book that I just,
Oh.
I mean, not just read, but your book that I read.
Please.
But Imani, certainly for boys, right? Don't cry.
Boys, sports.
Stop
Stay
being a punk.
tough.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah, stop being a punk. Are you hurt or are you injured? Or get the fuck back out there.
Right.
It's like, but I will say, like, one thing that I think people shouldn't miss the opportunity with is there's some, and I don't want to get too far ahead, there's some positives
Oh, sure.
from the
I
adversity.
agree with
yeah,
that
yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I agree with that
We're gonna
100%.
get into that.
Can I say one thing as
Sure.
far as a nurse that I want to point out? Two things. One, have you ever did your ACE score?
What is that?
So it's called Adverse Child Experiences. It gauges where you fall on the trauma spectrum.
I'm not familiar
And
with it.
yeah, so I learned it from Kimmy. She's in law enforcement, and she went through some kind of court class, and she mentioned it to me. So I went home, Googled it, and was like, oh, I want to see what my ACE score is. And it's like 10 questions. It asks, like, were you in a house with people who cursed all the time? Were you hit, were things thrown at you, or you were hit with things?
Check.
Yeah, right. So exactly. So the ACE score, anything over 4 is considered serious. Guess what mine was?
10. Oh, high five. Okay.
Not high five in the sense that you guessed it. Like
Yeah.
I was shocked
Well, as you were saying,
that
I'm
I was
thinking mine
10
must be a
out of 10.
Yeah.
And then for it to not to be treated until I get almost 40 years old. Can you imagine the collateral damage?
Right. I just recently started hearing about ACEs myself with the work that I do with one of the emergency medicine
I think it's
physicians.
important because
It's
I think
super
people
important.
need to identify whether you're because there's that solves that whole detachment with whether you've experienced trauma or not.
Right.
Like have you and there's no way if you read it, it's like you one of those you fit in there somewhere.
But absolutely contributes to our holistic health.
Yes.
Right? How we are treated, how our doctors treat us, all of those. I mean, we could get into social determinants of health and all of that, but certainly the disparities in healthcare.
Of
And
course.
then you add the
Of
ACE
course.
score to that.
Of course.
And we don't even know that that
course.
is a thing.
Which
that-
is why drug abuse, alcohol
Right.
use, gambling, all these adversities are so prevalent in our demographic.
Sure.
Is because we're trying to cope
right.
with all this stuff that we have no knowledge on how to fix or repair. I wanted to say one other thing. This is my nurse hat. I got to get this out. So, did you know that trauma affects our brain?
Yeah.
Okay, you did. Well, let's share that with our audience. I just want to point out the areas of like your brain formation really changes. So, given the pandemic, a lot of people you have to, if you sit down, like you said, and introspect, you'll know that this shit has affected me in some kind of way.
Yep.
Well, it's the same thing with trauma. It happens to us, but we compartmentalize, we tuck, we cope, we this, we that. But something has happened in our brain, and I want to point it out because a lot of people think we were talking about Imani, looking at him, the perception you have of him, but not knowing anything about his background, not knowing how it's affected him, and blah, blah, blah. You may think that he should respond to a thing. Let's use an example, a romantic example. You're my man, something happens, and you react in a way that is, I would say, I'm just going to say over the top.
Okay.
You go off. And I automatically say to myself, I'm just being me, this nigga's crazy. But I've had some history myself, but we haven't verbalized these things for me to identify. And actually, he's not crazy. He's really,
Which is dismissive.
yeah. But we're not getting to the root of really where these things stem from.
Traumatized.
Yeah, he's traumatized. I love that you said that. He's traumatized. So nobody's putting labels like Imani said. We got to start using the verbiage, the appropriate verbiage to these things in order for us to feel more comfortable vocalizing it because nobody even knows the words to put on it, right?
Right.
So here's the 3 parts of the brain. The amygdala, which is your emotional and instinctive center. That's targeted. Your emotions may not be as balanced as they should. Your instincts may be off. his point earlier when he said he was at the grocery store, that whole incident, your instincts are a little bit
warped.
hypersensitive, for lack of better word.
Yeah.
And then the hippocampus, which controls your memory. I'm directly affected by that. A lot of things people think I should remember about my childhood, about this, about that. I don't remember, and it's selective memory.
Sure,
I learned that
of
when
course.
I was getting counseling.
Right.
But a lot of those things, I don't know if I want to remember
Right.
them or I really can't remember them.
Right.
But if you ask me about that molestation, baby, I can give you blow by blow, the color, the scent, the carpet color, all that. But there's certain things in my past. You can ask me who my third grade teacher was. I have no
can't
clue.
tell you.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I want to go here for a second.
Stay there. Wait, let's get the one last
one
thing.
last thing,
One
okay.
last thing. One last part of the brain. Prefrontal cortex, which regulates your impulses.
Well,
That and let's use gang violence since we're talking about there was violence and we both grew up in a hood culture.
Right.
Their instincts are off. So they're wanting to belong. They're not acknowledging the fact that I want to belong. And that's how I get these alliances with these gangs, right? I want to belong, and part of belonging, there's a criteria that I must follow. And this may not be true to my nature, but I want to belong, right? And so they tell me, oh, you got to put in work. Blood.
Yeah.
You wanna be from so and so. What was you grew up in the Swans?
Yeah,
you grew up in the Swans. You got to put in work, blood. You got to go do da 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 to this kitchen crips or whatever the lingo. It's accurate, but yeah, you got to go do this. Something in you says like, I can't kill someone, right? I don't want to kill anybody. This is the human nature doesn't want to do the bad thing, but I have so much anger inside of me. I've seen so much. I want to emulate what I've seen. I got to act some of this out. So give a nigga a pistol and that ain't no problem. I will pop everybody on that porch, including the grandma, because the instinct center has been affected by all this trauma and or hypersensitive or hyposensitive, meaning desensitized to the whole
desensitized.
thing. So you're going to either overreact or you don't even have any emotion to this thing, so taking a life is not a big deal.
I mean, that's heavy.
Yeah.
When you think about the parts of the brain that are really, really
Your
affected,
brain
that
is,
impact
your
how you move in
brain
the
is
world
affected.
as a result of trauma.
When I was in nursing school and we started dealing with the neurological system, first of all, I didn't even connect that behavior was connected to the brain. I always think the brain is this organism that thinks, but it can't control like everything I do. Like it took some, knowledge to understand that all of your physical, mental, all of that is intertwined.
Yeah.
And DNA has a lot to do with how you respond to those things. So, got it out.
Okay. That's good stuff, though. That's good stuff. I wanna revisit this for both of you, because you both in your books talk about your parents' trauma. So, and I think it's the same for the both of you, Imani. I know you started putting pieces of the puzzle together much later.
Yeah.
Was it after your parents transitioned, or were you putting pieces of the puzzle together when they were still here?
I was doing it when I lost my father. We lost my father when I was like 17. So,
Okay.
I think that came much later.
Like your mom's violent trauma.
Yeah, and to her credit, she shared a lot.
Okay.
She shared.
That's good.
Yeah. She shared a lot, whether I wanted it or not. She would share a lot.
My mom did too, though.
Yeah, and then when she passed, after getting over that life-changing event,
Sure.
I progressively started taking a deeper dive. But then I would say in the last 5 years especially, that's when I really went down the rabbit hole.
To figure out
To sort
where
through all
she
the
came
pieces.
from, what this behavior was about.
Right.
And
But
who did you talk to? Like,
That's what I wanna
how did
know.
you get into that?
I mean, I had the last guy I was seeing coincidentally he is a guy. I'll give him.
I mean, family members.
Oh,
though,
family?
To dig into mom stuff. Yeah.
Mostly my oldest sister, because it doesn't it's never felt like it was something the youngest girl, who's the second oldest, really wanted to take the dive in.
Okay.
And my brother, not so much. But it was really with my oldest sister, who's
She's like a
more
second mom.
in a way, yeah. Yeah, she reminds me a lot of my mother. So we'll talk for hours, and she doesn't mind, the uncomfortable conversation. And then kind of in parallel, sort of my aunt, like she's like the aunt I'm most close to. But
Your mother's sister or your dad's?
My mother's sister. Like I don't have a relationship with
You
either
had
of them.
way too much history, though. I was like, this is incredible.
He remembers so much.
Oh,
though.
my God.
He remembers a lot. And then but for you, Tanisha, so you said your mom shared a lot of stuff, but
It was all traumatic, though. The only history that I have from my family is all traumatic. It was all colorism. It was all prejudice within the culture. And it was all violence. Like, nobody shared, like, the real good parts of history. I don't have any of that.
really,
I don't have any of that. I just know about I know that the matriarchs were very dominant, and that went back. And the matriarchs, my grandfather is a big guy, was tough guy, Marine. He thinks he can whoop any 3 men in America's ass. But he didn't believe in hitting women. And my grandmother was this feisty, insecure woman who knows what issues she had with her brokenness. But she always accused my grandfather of cheating when he was gambling. He was a gambler. So he'd be out doing horse stuff, but she thought he was cheating. And so one time she came, hit him in the head with an iron. The blood spouted from the top of his head to the ceiling, and my mother still describes, she said, until they sold that house, the blood stain was on the top of the ceiling. And I was telling her one day, don't you know that has to affect you?
right?
Yeah.
You were in the room with blood on the ceiling.
And then my mother turned around, her and my dad got in a scuffle, and she tried to shoot his penis off.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
So
I mean, like this, it's
Was
like
he that
this,
bad of a lover? I mean,
right?
but I think so. I mean, you're going right down my
Generational.
list. You're going right down my list in terms of similarities, because same kind of gunplay and stuff was happening in your home. So let me ask you this, and I'm gonna come back to that statement. But so was it your oldest sister or the second sister who left home to escape the violence, and then in the book, and then ended up being in this relationship that was traumatizing?
There was a lead up to that. Like they all would run away in cycles.
Okay.
Which was a stressful event to watch itself. Just like in and out, like it's like a plantation and there's an escape. But it was that's how
There's
I felt.
a reality to that, though, because I know what she's leading up to. I did the same thing. Like, I literally, when I was reading your book, I got emotional because I was thinking, damn.
It's incredible that your stories have so many similarities.
Yeah.
Man. And let me say
written
this.
so far apart.
And T.D. Jakes says there's a secret fraternity between people who know pain.
Absolutely.
I can see that.
I absolutely believe that.
So like we probably knew each other and crossed paths, but didn't know each other. But literally, our lives are so parallel till you can he can sense why I feel this way about this, and I can understand why he would feel this way about this because of our similar backgrounds. But go ahead, sis. I'm sorry.
I lost my thought.
Well, it was my oldest sister that that went as far away as she could in Iowa, and at the age of 17, and got married when she was like, I want to say 19 or 20.
Me too.
It was just this overzeal to depart,
get out,
get away,
get
and
out,
to have a different experience.
Into the same thing.
But end up running into an abusive man.
So, sis, your book is all about your surviving these incidents of domestic violence and violence, and not just,
perpetual.
just perpetual, right? Fights with girls in the street.
I mean, just perpetual.
Just had a baby, all of that kind of stuff. So certainly you talk about how these violent traumas were in your romantic life. did they show up in other places, these tendencies for you to be violent?
Oh yeah, it was both. So I was a bully at school, and I didn't.
Which I just don't remember.
Yeah, because that was on the east side. That's before I got to the west side going to
Oh,
school. This
okay.
was like in early elementary days. But that was one of the ways that I got out some of my aggression. I found someone that I thought was, quote unquote, the weaker vessel, and I would watch him for a bit to see, oh yeah, I can definitely.
Reverse threat assessment.
Yeah, exactly. And it helped me. I feel like and this is a dysfunctional thing to say, but it helped me to release some of the frustration and the total mind fuck of being an abandoned child who didn't get affection and wasn't receiving the things that I thought I should at that age. I knew that I should get hugs. I knew that by watching other kids that one of these parents, grandparents, somebody should be holding my hand every now and then. Someone should have physical touch with me. And that wasn't happening. And now I got 3 grown daughters who say, like, they tell therapists that my mom was emotionally absent, which is very, very hurtful to me, but I didn't know how. It wasn't something that was visual or demonstrated in front of me. I actually still feel uncomfortable when I embrace them, but I long for their love now, so I'm intentional with it. But it's not something like I tell them when I say, Shay, I love you, sometimes they'll bust out laughing. And it's like it's a joke. It's
Damn.
like this one, like, and I get choked up because I'm thinking, damn, how do you heal these things when I've created when you talk about generations, now I've passed it down to my kids.
Certainly.
Well, it's good that you're taking accountability.
Oh yeah, but
Like,
it's
like it doesn't make it any better. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't feel any better, but at least you're doing that.
yeah, but it's crazy how you see these things and you don't really like. For many years, up until I wrote the book, a lot of my life was what I considered normal. And I see a lot of people who are stuck and unaware because it's their normal. So in the hood, somebody could be going through the stuff I went through with my baby daddies and boyfriends and nigga, excuse my French, they grab you in the throat because they're jealous or say, you better shut your ass up, you better shut the fuck up and that kind of stuff. That's normal in the hood. So I could talk to some of my girlfriends and they'd be like, so you say you were abused?
Right. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And it's like, I'm going through this kind of with my ex now. He was in prison for many years. We grew up together. I identified in the book our history with abuse. He read it and I thought I was saying in my mind, now if something happened to me, y'all know who did it because I exposed him. Wow. And so, but when he read it, he was hurt. He said, I didn't think that I didn't feel like I was doing these things. But then one day he said, you know what, you're right. I did do those things and I want to correct it. Now here's the flip part. Fast forward, I forgive you for all these things. We establish a friendship, right? And then old Pete shows up again. What do you do with that? I had to say to myself that, listen, I would like to have a healthy friendship with you, but what I cannot invite is any of the pain I prayed my way out of. So if you show some of those same behavior patterns that are triggers for me and attach me to 40 years of abuse, oh yeah, we can't have that friendship and with kids, grandkids and all that.
Right.
Friendship is a null and void because we got to reconcile this shit. I can't keep inviting that in my life and expect to heal. Or what you gonna do with the woman who ain't healed? You can't even handle broken Tanisha, so you want to get to let Tanisha heal.
So, Imani, how does if you can get into this, does trauma show up in your romantic relationships? What does that look like, and how do you mitigate it? That's for both of you, but I'll start with you.
The short answer is yeah, but it just manifested in a different way. What I recognize is how I could have a strong reaction to what she described, like that. You know, that sassy, you
That
know,
mouth.
that head, that, you know, neck
Yeah.
rolling, like all that, like yelling at me.
That ain't it.
I become.
I could see that
I don't
for myself too.
I become. I'm trying to
Say
get
it.
the right. Like I'm a killer.
Okay.
Like
So it's a trigger for you.
Yeah, I will. Like if you are demonstrating behavior that
Aggression.
that I grew up in the house, that it's insulting, hurtful,
Disrespectful.
I will fucking shut that shit down.
Okay.
What does that look like?
Yeah.
Now? What do you mean?
Well, I've been told that I could be intimidating.
Is it looks?
It's a look I will give you. It's my silence. It's speaking slowly to you
Like
to let you know,
condescending.
fucking
Yeah.
tread carefully.
Yeah. Passive aggressive a bit.
No, it's just I wouldn't say passive. It's I'm trying to give you a measured warning.
Okay.
That you're a fucking
Hair.
away
Yeah.
from
I
me
feel
never
that.
dealing with you ever again.
I feel that.
'Cause-
I feel that.
and it's like, yeah, so like that it's like that verbalization, the yelling, just being immature. Like I deal with it better now versus what I did as a younger man. But it all came back from the stuff with my mother and stuff from girls in the neighborhood and girls that I dated where I didn't have the tools to manage that.
Okay.
Did you perpetrate? Did you perpetrate? If you're comfortable with sharing, did you perpetrate? Let's say if you and I were in a relationship and I'm broken and you trigger me, and I was scared of my ex-husband, so I didn't. I was very silent and submissive in a relationship, and I think that he still identifies me as that woman. But anyway, long story short, if I did say, Imani, you're not gonna be doing that, you ain't gonna be talking to me like so and so and so. I don't know who the fuck you think you talking to, and da 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 da. The whole nine. You said you're not with that business.
Yeah.
So, are you the dude that's gonna chastise me, for lack of better words?
Like verbally shout you down?
Or physically?
Physically? No physical stuff.
Okay.
I would like if the progression with me is if she's like that, there's no reasoning with that. I'm not even trying to reason with that.
Yeah, my experience of you.
You
as
shut
your
down?
friend, it's not a shutdown. It's a withdrawal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I do. I shut down.
It's a withdrawal.
Yep. And
And you gonna feel that thing. Like you gonna know. You gonna know.
That is not
I'm
tolerated.
not fooling with you.
Yeah.
I'm withdrawing, and I don't even think enough to communicate.
Oh, that's good, though.
I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about personally, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't even think enough of you to communicate how I feel right now.
Oh, that's a bit stonewalling.
it's icy. Yep.
That's a bit
It's
stonewalling.
icy.
Oh,
it's
okay.
like I'm better at it. I'm way better at that, but it's like icy withdrawal. Like okay,
I'm the same way though. I cannot say a thing about what happens for me is I'm afraid of the explosive side of that. So the safer thing for me to do is either remove myself. So I ain't no talking to me. We can't have no conversation, none of that. Or there is a coldness about me that is emotionally traumatizing to you because
Well,
I know how to make
I
I
think
know how
that's
to
the
make you
same.
so I know how to make you feel it in a way that is way more damaging than me cussing you out or trying to fight with you.
So sis, how do you manage that in your romantic life today? How do you mitigate that icy need to make others feel
For me,
that?
a huge part of it, and I'm being as transparent as I know how to be, is communication. So before I even get to that point with you, I want to say, Imani, I feel like yesterday when we were talking and we had this situation, I just felt like you mishandled me. Do you want to talk about it? And if you're stonewalling or cold or evasive or this or that, then I say, in my mind, the broken little girl who's going through all these years of abuse, that's rejection to me. So you know what? You rejecting me, my whole body language is going to be, nigga, fuck you. And I don't like that about myself, so I try to verbalize it before we get to that and no offense to Latinos, but I say before I get to my little Mexican standoff where I don't talk to you so long that you start feeling like, damn, does she have a heart? Oh, she cold-blooded. I don't want those defenses to go up. So let's verbalize, let's talk about this thing. If I'm with somebody that I can't talk to, I'm going to probably say that. I'm not able, my heart don't feel safe with you. I can't express myself to you. I can't communicate with you on an adult level. This ain't going to work out for me. This ain't going to work out.
Okay, so but is the body language, the withdrawal, the stonewall, is that a trauma response?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
I just
I'm
wanna be
defending
clear.
my heart. This is somebody who has 40 years. Oh, are we there? Oh, we're over. Okay. I think Felicia said we could do 30 minutes. Can we? You good with it? Okay.
Dang,
Let's
that time
complete it.
went
It
fast.
flies by. So make sure you get important points out. But I make sure that I'm verbal, one, because I was silenced by the shame of the abuse and the trauma for so many years. It's important for me to get my words out.
Okay.
I am sensitive to men, and men, you can't just bombard them with words and yang, 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 yang. Like, I'm not that person. I do wait for a moment where we can talk, where I can say, so babe, the other day when we were having a situation and we had a disagreement, you want to talk about that?
I think that's
And if
fine.
you say yeah, then yes, let's have
I
this
would never
exchange.
reject that. Like I would either say yeah, I'd like to, but I can't now for whatever reason. But like,
I would appreciate that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Like I'm glad you said that, but yeah, let's dive into it. But the minute the minute a person starts hurling insults and passive aggressiveness and little sarcasm, it's like you're not ready.
So it's interesting we're having this conversation because we did, Tanisha and I were doing these meetings and recordings and talking about all of this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought you up, I said, Imani says the bee is attracted to the butterfly. So like all of that.
The flower.
The flower, that's
Yeah.
what I'm sorry.
The bee is attracted to the flower. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And the flower is not all of that other stuff that is a trauma response. But I think it's important that we all have compassion and understand that anybody could be having a trauma response.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So all of that
That's
stuff.
really good that you're saying that, sis, because I often feel misunderstood. And let's just use this conversation, this discussion. When my voice octaves go up, it's more passion behind it versus a confrontational woman with unbalanced emotions. I'm just very passionate about this painful, shameful part of my life. So don't misinterpret that. And I'm not directing that at you. Don't misinterpret my expressing myself. Don't put that in a box without learning me and understanding where that comes from. You know what I mean? Because you could see me in another setting and I say very little because I'm sizing the room up and gauging who is warm enough for me to invite, whom I go hot and cold.
Okay.
So with regard, and it goes back to trauma, I got to feel safe. So any environment that I'm in, remember we talked about that, I scan a room.
Right.
And if you have the standoffish people or certain type of personality traits that don't agree with me feeling safe, I'm probably not going to say too much to them.
Okay. So how do you flip that and bring safety into the space that you come into?
Well, I have self-talks, one, because through counseling, I learned how to self-affirm and provide that safety for myself. So I say to myself, Tanisha, you're safe with you. So it doesn't matter who you engage in this room. You're in control of what you invite in. So if you do engage somebody who is not inviting or who is, whatever the case is, not welcoming or whatever the case is, I know how to say within myself, they have an option of whether or not they want to, engage me. And I take that with a grain of salt. It used to really, really affect me until I identified that, oh, that's connected to trauma.
Okay. Okay.
But before I couldn't do that.
So, and speaking about safe spaces, Imani, I want you to talk a little bit about the Mva Foundation as we are running out of time, but I think it's hugely important. So tell the people what it is, what your goal is, your mission.
Yeah, thank you. So after writing the book, I felt like, like I had to do something, like takes, like it's like, okay, what's an appropriate step? And I came up with the Mva Foundation because there's two things I want to do, and I gotta dive more into that. Like, there's two parts. There's a service part of it, because I'm aware of the disruption that happens to people when they're going through a violent traumatic episode. There's disruption of income, disruption of having shelter, transportation and whatnot. So I want to help people with funds to address those disruptive moments in one respect. The bigger part of it is I want to build a free mobile app for people that helps them identify their traumatic state and then navigate them to the appropriate endpoint of help, whether that's counseling, whether that's legal help, whether that's psychological, like whatever. So like that's my whole mission, and like I plan on diving more into that with funding and grants and stuff. But I have this vision, like that's the twofold mission of the Mva Foundation, and Mva is Latin for on the way to, basically. Yeah.
That's
Okay.
really good.
I know, I love it. And by the way, you can follow Imani on social media. There was violence on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok.
TikTok too, yeah.
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 And then
And
Tanisha.
Audible. I bought my book on Audible.
And the book is available on Amazon and Audible. Listen, listening to him
I loved
tell the
it.
story
I
is
loved it.
its own experience. So
Thank you.
yeah, it is. It's
you,
really good.
And you can also go to www.therewasviolence.com
Oh,
if you ever get
cool.
lost.
That's great.
Okay, so then Broken Baby Doll is its own story about surviving domestic abuse. But what else are you doing, Tanisha, to create a platform for women around shame disrobing, if you will?
So it started out with me doing small groups. So I went to the church because I felt like that's where it's really unspoken. So I started reaching out to women's groups in the church and then just talking, giving them a safe space to verbalize whether they're even experiencing abuse or trauma. And you'd be surprised. And then guiding them on talking to the counseling department. However, I learned that a lot of counseling is not geared towards help with these things in the church. It's a different approach.
Okay.
Leonka alluded to that when we had our discussion before, how it's kind of like biblical talk of let's pray about it, let's point you to scriptures, that sort of thing. So church counseling has a different approach than clinical setting.
Okay.
So I did the small groups thing. I did public speaking on both the nurse's perspective with regard to domestic violence, because a lot of people who are experiencing it, they don't know how to reach out for help. And I myself, I was with a gangster, so there was safety issues with exposing that. And even when I did expose it, there was no protection for me. Like they literally drive him around the corner and let him loose, and then I'm back dealing with this even more combative and violent person because I just report him to the police. So I didn't have protection there. So I did the public speaking and the small groups, and then I started the podcast Vibe of the Tribe because I wanted to give the community a place to, like we're doing, hear the verbiage, get comfortable with having conversation about the verbiage. But I had the young adult perspective, I had a man on the show, and then two women. So you had the perspective of everybody who's part of the tribe, so to speak. And then just recently, you and I are collaborating on a documentary that I'd like to get finished this month, November, dealing directly with the shame, particularly for Black women, the shame aspects that we carry as far as body image, how we treat each other, how men treat us with regard to shame. So putting the shame topic or conversation on the forefront, because within my capacity, I don't have a lot that I feel that I can do I'm a crusader. I would love to save the world, but I don't have the capacity to do that. So within my gifts, let's start here.
Yeah.
And like I said, I was silenced for so many years, so now I get to speak. That's my forum. That's where I navigate fluently, is let's have these tough talks.
Okay.
So that's where it is.
All right. Any points either one of you want to leave the people with or each other with?
I mean, I think, like, I look at myself like her, like Tanisha's, like I'm just joining the chorus of voices that's advocating for, having the self-awareness. Like, if you think something's up with you, man, you gotta explore that at your pace. Like, it's like it's emotional trauma is not like a cracked tooth or a broken bone. It's like it's easy to point to that, and there's already relatively a predetermined corrective course of action in dealing with that.
Right.
But emotional trauma is so nuanced, and it's like you got to ask yourself, if this is you, whoever's listening, like, what's the payoff in doing nothing? And
That's rich.
Because when things happen to you, it's going to have a neutral effect, a positive effect, or a negative effect. And just like COVID, to go back to that, a virus or a malady will thrive. It is dependent on your cooperation of doing nothing or doing what's ineffective.
Right.
So take that plunge, take that step, whether it's talking to a counselor, a friend you can trust, somebody in your spiritual community, but just take a step. And there's no one blueprint for everybody. So you just got to take that step. You got to get in the phone booth with that.
That's
and
good.
Sometimes you just got to slug it out.
That's really good.
I want to say something to that. And then, sis, I want you to answer. Because for me, and I didn't even consider my stuff like violent trauma, but certainly my own trauma. And I've done therapy. I've had a few therapists, but a lot of my breakthroughs came in the last 3 or 4 years in like these settings where I'm talking about slicing myself open, screaming out loud, laying on the floor in a group of people.
Yeah.
5 days in a room, letting that stuff out. That ain't for everybody. But I was invited to do some of these sessions, and that's what worked for me. Like, and it was, Imani, it was so enlightening because it was a lot of the verbiage where I could identify a thing and put a name to a thing. And I think that's hugely, hugely important. So like you said, as long as you're doing the same thing over and over, that just creates a space for the infection to
Just the bubble. Living in a
just
bubble.
keep thriving. So take a step.
Yeah.
All right, Tanisha.
I wanted to point out the fact we do have similar paths with it being childhood trauma. And I don't feel like there's enough platforms to address the child who can't speak for themselves. So what's important to point out is, Imani, I don't know your age, but we're about the same age or the same age. Okay, so we're both 52. I didn't write my book until 4 years ago. I didn't talk about this at all until 4 years ago. So you have children in their formative years who are dealing with these things and carrying these things for years and years and years, and then they become these broken adults
Right.
who some are treated, some are not. Some take it to their grave and are never treated, but we still have to go to where it begins. It can start in utero, but we got to deal with these kids, and we need to have, I don't know if there's something in place now for children therapy to give children a way to identify and speak to what they're experiencing. And you can't just open that up because they have parents that they're going home to.
Right.
But how do we, one, give them a place to speak up and catch it early, like preventative care? Catch it before it takes root and becomes all these other things. And then what kind of things would be in place to ensure that the child doesn't become something else, if I'm communicating that right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like in elementary school, there was nothing like that.
Right.
And I don't know if there is now.
Well, I think thanks to the internet and all of this other stuff, there's so many possibilities for identifying this thing in me as a child. So possibly, I don't know what those things are either, but I think there probably are more opportunities
Well,
for
I would think so.
children
Maybe so.
to
Maybe so.
access.
I'd be
those
interested in
feelings.
tapping into that, though, because I think that looking back, given a different set of circumstances, more information, more exposure to things that would contribute to my healing, I wouldn't end up in one abusive relationship after the next. And a lot of those situations could have taken my life. There
Sure.
are a lot of people. My girlfriend Kelly ended up doing 14 years in prison for killing her husband. And she was a teenage pregnancy, felt safer with the husband. She was on the show, felt safer with the husband and trying to raise them by herself, was in a totally abusive situation, and ended up to protect herself. She had to kill her husband and left the kids for 14 years.
Wow.
I mean, and underneath all those things, I'm using Kelly she wouldn't mind, that's my sis, but those situations, there's a lot of unaddressed issues under there.
Sure.
When she was on the show, she talked about a issue after issue
and can
after
still
issue.
be compounding.
Yeah. But now she's going all over the world getting policies changed in laws for people who are experience some unfair acts and racial disparities in prison. And it just opened up, like she's using her wounds for wisdom and her pain for purpose.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's what I want to do too. I mean, that's where the direction that I'm moving in now.
You are. I'm excited.
So
about
this was so good,
Really,
and
really,
I'm
really
really
good.
happy that you came on
Yeah.
to have this discussion with us, Imani. I would like to maybe in the future, depending on where your book goes, collaborate in a setting similar to this if the opportunity arises, because it doesn't happen. I've never seen the male and female perspective
So
on
maybe
these
that's
situations.
something we've been talking about.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm open to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, listen. Broken Baby Doll. There was violence. Amazon, Audible, get your copy.
Whoop, 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 whoop.
Help yourself. Help somebody else.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be about you. It could just be about you wanting to help somebody else or just educating people.
Yeah.
This was good.
This is great.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
you.
Guys.